I didn't realize he was gone until I saw his boots weren't by the door. That's how I knew. Not the empty hanger, not the untouched coffee, not the silence, the boots. He always left them at the door. Muddy, loud, wide like everything else about him. When I was little, I used to try to stand in them. Pretend I'd grow into a man like that. When I was 10, I stopped trying. Because he was gone. And those boots, and the space he left behind, were the only thing he ever truly gave us. My name is Mark Ellis. I'm 56 years old. And if you'd told me that the man who disappeared without a word when I was a kid would show up at my front door 4 decades later, smiling like we were old friends, I wouldn't have believed you. But he did. And what he said? "You're famous now. I figured it was time." We weren't poor when I was a kid. We were just one bad decision away from it. My dad, Jack Ellis, worked odd jobs. One week, he'd fix trucks. The next, he'd paint houses or bartend at a dive across town. He was never consistent, except in 2 things: drinking and disappearing. He'd vanish for a day or 2 every few weeks. Sometimes he'd come back with cash. Sometimes with a busted lip. Once with a puppy, who ran away 2 weeks later. My mom, Linda, didn't cry much, but she folded laundry like it had personally wronged her. That's how I knew when things were bad. He wasn't always terrible. Some days he'd come home sober, make pancakes for dinner, call me champ, and toss a football in the yard like we were a real family. And on those days, I'd forget the bad ones. That's the thing about being a kid. You forgive easy when all you want is to be seen. But the older I got, the more I started seeing the cracks. He didn't just drink. He lied. He cheated on her. I didn't know the details back then. I just knew how Mom looked after a certain woman from his work left a note under our door. I knew when she stopped wearing her wedding ring and never explained why. When I was 10, he left for good. No fight, no storm out. He just didn't come home one night. We waited 3 days. Mom called his brother, his boss, the ER, nothing. On the 5th day, she quietly threw out his razor. On the 6th, she boxed up his boots and put them in the garage. On the 7th, she said one sentence: "We're moving forward now." And we did. We moved into a smaller apartment. I got a job sweeping floors at a local mechanic's after school. Laura, my sister, 2 years younger, started cooking dinner on nights Mom worked the late shift. And Mom? She never once said his name again. Not in anger, not in sadness. Just never. It was like we were supposed to erase him. Like he'd been a bad dream we weren't allowed to talk about. But I remembered. Every day. At 12, I told people my dad had died. It was easier. People respect grief. They don't know what to do with abandonment. Dead dads get sympathy. Missing ones get awkward silences and forced smiles. I spent my teens proving I didn't need him. Graduated early. Scholarships. Taught myself coding in a library using outdated terminals and gum wrappers as bookmarks. Mom called me her quiet storm. I got into college, worked 2 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, ate noodles and ambition. I didn't drink, didn't run, didn't disappear. By the time I turned 30, I had my own tech consulting firm. By 40, I sold it. Not for billions, but enough that people paid attention when I spoke. I married a woman who didn't flinch when I told her I didn't know where my father was. Karen knew how to hold space for silence. She also knew when not to fill it. We had 2 kids, Ben, then Sophie. I taught them how to ride bikes, how to say sorry when you're wrong, and how to ask for help. All the things I had to teach myself. I thought that was enough. Until the knock. It was a Sunday. Sophie had just left with Karen to check out wedding venues. Ben was visiting from Denver, staying with friends. I was alone. The knock wasn't loud, just firm. I opened the door and felt the world shrink. There he was, Jack Ellis, 46 years older, thinner, sun-creased skin, white scruff where his full beard used to be. A windbreaker zipped all the way up despite the heat. But those eyes? Still the same. Sharp, uncomfortable, searching. "Hey," he said, "you're doing well, huh?" I didn't answer. "I saw you on the news. The piece about the scholarship fund. Thought maybe—" He shrugged. "We could talk." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I'm staying nearby. Fairlight Inn, room 203. Just in case you want to." And with that, he nodded, turned, and walked away. I didn't sleep that night, didn't eat, just sat on the couch replaying every terrible memory like a slow slideshow. The way Mom whispered, "It's not your fault." The time I lied to Laura and said Dad sent a letter, just so she'd stop crying. The way I used to stare out the window every evening for 3 months, waiting, praying, begging for him to come back. The next day, I drove to Fairlight Inn. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before going in. I didn't know what I was going to say, didn't even know why I was there. But some part of me, the part that never got closure, needed to see what he'd turned into. His room smelled like old motel rooms always do, air freshener over cigarette smoke and something floral trying too hard. He looked surprised when I knocked, like he hadn't really believed I'd come. "Mark," he said, "thanks for—" "Don't." I cut him off. I didn't sit. He motioned to a chair. "I just want to say one thing," he said. I crossed my arms. He nodded. "I left because I was a coward. I thought you'd be better off without me." "That's the line you're going with?" "No," he said. "That's the truth I've been trying to say out loud for decades." There was silence. I looked at the photos taped to the mirror. Me, from my company site. Sophie, from the newspaper feature about the scholarship gala. Ben, from LinkedIn, smiling in a blurry team photo. He'd been watching, from far away. "I'm not here for money," he said. "Good, because you're not getting any." He nodded again. "I just wanted to see you before I run out of time." "What's that supposed to mean?" He hesitated, then said, "Stage 4. Liver." I didn't say anything, not out of shock, but because I couldn't tell if I cared. He coughed, pulled a folder from the nightstand. Inside, scans, labs, doctor's notes. I didn't look. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I'm not here to." He smiled, and for once it wasn't smug, just tired. "You turned out better than I ever could have hoped." "No thanks to you." "Exactly," he said, and somehow that stung more than I expected. When I got home, Karen was folding laundry on the couch. I didn't say anything for a while, just stood in the doorway like a ghost. She looked up, met my eyes, and said, "It's him, isn't it?" I sat down slowly, and finally said, "Yeah, it's him." I told her everything, from the motel room to the cancer. She listened without interrupting, just like she did the first time I told her he left. And when I finished, she asked me a question I hadn't prepared for. "Do you want him to meet the kids?" I blinked. I don't think so." "Do you want to meet him again?" I didn't answer right away. Then finally, "I don't know. Maybe." The next morning I called Laura. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, stranger." Her voice hadn't changed in 20 years. Warm, wry, always a little amused. "I saw him," I said. Silence. Then, "So he's alive?" "Yeah." Another pause. "And you met him?" "I did." She didn't respond. "I didn't plan to. He just showed up." "Of course he did," she said. "That's what he does. Disappears and reappears like he's still part of the story." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "He's dying." "I'm sorry," she said, but it didn't sound like she meant it. And I didn't blame her. That weekend I drove upstate to see her. She lived in a small house with 2 kids and a husband I always liked, but never knew that well. We sat on her back porch drinking coffee while her boys chased each other in the yard. "Did he say why he left?" she asked. "He said he was a coward, that he thought we'd be better off." She made a face. "He's not wrong, but that doesn't make it okay." "No," I said, "it doesn't." She pulled out a box from the hall closet before I left. "I was going to give this to you after Mom died," she said, "but I couldn't. Not then." Inside were some of Mom's journals, old photos, receipts, birthday cards, and an envelope. On the front, "For Mark, if Jack ever comes back." My hands went cold. Laura didn't say anything. She just hugged me tight before I left. And then I drove home with that envelope sitting in the passenger seat like it might explode. I didn't open it right away, just stared at it on my desk for hours. Finally, around midnight, I sat down, turned on the desk lamp, and opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. No date, just her familiar, careful cursive. "Mark, if you're reading this, it means he's back. And that means you're probably feeling something I know all too well. Anger, confusion, maybe even guilt for not wanting to see him. Let me start by saying, whatever you feel, it's valid. When he left, I tried to protect you from how broken I really was. I kept my head up, got extra shifts, smiled when you brought home that most improved ribbon. But inside, I was shattered. I loved him once, but he stopped loving himself long before he stopped loving us. He didn't leave because of you. He left because of everything he couldn't face in himself. And if he ever comes back, I'm not asking you to forgive him. I'm just asking you not to let the part of him that hurt you turn you into someone you're not. You are not your father's shadow. You are your own light, and you are stronger than any man who walks away." I read it 3 times, then I folded it, set it back in the envelope, and cried. The kind of cry I hadn't let myself feel in decades. The kind that came from the boy who stood in an empty hallway when he was 10 years old, waiting for footsteps that never came. That Sunday, I called Jack. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "I found a letter from Mom," I said. He was quiet. Then he said, "She was the best person I ever knew." "She really was," he exhaled. "Do you want to meet again?" "I do." We met at the park downtown. He was bundled in the same windbreaker, moved slower, looked smaller. We sat on a bench and didn't speak for a long time. Then I handed him a folded paper. "What's this?" "Mom's letter." He looked down at it, didn't open it, just held it, like it weighed more than it should. "I'm not here to rewrite the past," he said. "Good, because you can't. I know." I looked out at the pond, watched the ducks float past, and then I asked, "Why now? Why not 20 years ago?" He didn't hesitate. "I was ashamed. I still am. But I'm also dying. And I didn't want the last thing I ever did to be nothing." He looked at me. "I wanted to say goodbye. The right way." I didn't say anything, but for the first time I didn't feel like screaming. I didn't feel like the wounded kid, or the angry man, or the father still carrying 100 pounds of unfinished sentences. I just felt still. We sat like that until the sun dropped behind the trees. Then he stood up. "Can I see you again sometime?" "Maybe," I said, "but not as a father, just as someone I used to know." He smiled, and nodded, and walked back to the parking lot without turning around. I'd kept him a secret from my kids their whole lives. Not intentionally, not maliciously. It just never came up. They never asked. I never told. There was always a new school project, a sports game, a late-night coding session, or a family trip that made the question feel unnecessary. But now I realized that leaving that part of the story blank hadn't protected them. It had just left a piece of me unexplained. I started with Ben. He was 31 now, sharp, thoughtful, lived in Denver with a dog he'd rescued from a snowstorm, and a girlfriend who worked in behavioral science. He was the kind of son any man would be proud of. We were eating lunch at a diner off I-70 when I finally told him. About Jack, about the knock on my door, about the diagnosis. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he set down his fork. So, he just showed up after 4 decades? Yeah. And you let him in? Sort of. Not all the way, but enough to ask him why. Ben nodded slowly. Do you want me to meet him? I don't want you to do anything you're not ready for. That's not an answer, Dad. I looked at him and said the truth. I think I just want you to see who I came from, so you understand why I worked so hard to become someone different. Ben met him 2 weeks later. No formal setting, no staged introductions, just the two of them sitting across from each other at a quiet coffee shop. I sat one table away, watched them talk, watched Jack stumble through basic questions, not out of disinterest, but fatigue. He was fading, more than I realized. When the meeting ended, Ben walked over to me and said, I get it now. What do you mean? You, the way you raised us, the way you never gave up. I get it now. Then he hugged me, and I had to step outside to breathe. Sophie was harder. She'd always been my mirror, fiercely independent, razor-sharp instincts, loyal to the bone. I told her the same way, calmly, honestly, no drama. She sat back in her chair and crossed her arms. He left you. I know. And now he wants a goodbye? Maybe? She shook her head. I'm not ready for this. You don't have to be. But do you want me to meet him? I want you to have the choice I didn't. That made her pause. Then she said, Okay. 1 coffee. But if he says something smug, I'm walking. She didn't walk, but she didn't smile either. They sat outside on a bench, warm tea in their hands, both dressed like they weren't sure whether this was a meeting or a memorial. She asked hard questions. He gave soft answers. At the end, she stood up, shook his hand, and said, You're lucky my dad became who he is. He looked up at her and replied, I know. And that was that. 2 days later, I got a call from the hospice nurse. His vitals were dropping, fast. I drove over alone, sat beside him as machines beeped in low, lazy rhythms. He was barely conscious, thin, hollow, but he opened his eyes when I said his name. Mark? I'm here. Thank you. For what? For letting me see the man you became. He coughed, voice raw. I used to think leaving made me free. He looked at me, eyes glassy. But it made me empty, for years. Until now. I didn't know what to say, so I said the only thing I could. Rest now. And he did. He died that night, peacefully. No last words, just silence. The funeral was small. No eulogies, no fanfare. Just me, Laura, Ben, and Sophie. Karen stood beside me the whole time, hand in mine. We scattered his ashes near the lake behind the hospice center, where the trees bowed gently toward the water, where the wind didn't ask for anything. That evening, back at home, I sat with the old envelope Mom had left, read the letter again. Then I pulled out a blank page and wrote one of my own. Not for Jack, not for my kids, but for the boy I used to be. Hey kid, I'm sorry he left. I'm sorry you stood at that window for weeks, waiting, but you made it. You became everything he wasn't. Not because of him, but because you chose better. And that choice? That's who you are. Not his son, just you. M.E. A few months later, Sophie asked me if she could read at her wedding. I thought she meant vows, but instead, she read the letter, the one I wrote to myself. And when she finished, she looked at me and said, Dad, Thank you for breaking the cycle. I didn't cry. Not there. But later that night, I stood alone on the balcony, looked up at the stars, and said goodbye. Not to Jack, but to the version of me that still needed him to come back. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't anger. It's living a life so full, so steady, so whole, that the people who left can't even recognize who you became without them.